So, this is the analysis of the speech circuit. Okay, first point, very important point. Concepts are associated with signs. Very, very important point. Concepts we haven't yet discussed what signs are yet. I haven't discussed, in this video I'm going to discuss what signs are. But we recognize that concepts are associated with signs. What you should be thinking is in previous videos, probably one of the videos in the first section, in the first series, what I said was Saussure finds this account, his account of semiology, within the history of ideas. At his point, it sort of culminated linguistic analysis. It was culminated within his work. Obviously, he's contributed to a whole line of theory and a whole line of reasoning since, but at his point, it was sort of the end, not really the end, but the culmination, the pinnacle of linguistic analysis. So you can sort of trace philology to comparative philology, comparative grammar, trace that to neo-grammarian and the neo-grammarian movement, trace that to philosophers' role in pre-semiotics, specifically Locke's role in pre-semiotics, before semiotics was created. And what Locke says in Essays Concerning Human Understanding, I forget what the section was, and I've already lectured on this in this series, Locke says that there is an inextricable relationship between the sound and the idea. If you divorce the sound from the idea, then you're talking nonsense. And the example I gave was the parrot. I've given that example a million times, so I'm not going to give that example again now. What you should be thinking in your mind is, what is the relationship between the Lockean sound-idea dichotomy, or duality rather, it's not really a dichotomy, but the sound-idea duality to the concept-sign duality, right? What is the relationship between the Lockean sound-idea duality to the concept-sign? If you say the concept is sort of a corollary with the idea, well, you're right. In Locke, we don't quite have the idea as explicitly spelled out of the sign yet. So we do recognize now that, and you should recognize the idea in Locke, I've spent some time discussing that, we recognize that there's a corollary in semiology insofar as we have the idea of the concept, right? And this becomes very, very interesting for me, but I'm not going to jump into it just yet. Okay, so we get that. Now let's just say that C, this is my convention now, let's say C equals concept and S equals the sign. So we'll say C equals the concept, S equals the sign. So we can have, if you have the concept and then you have the sign, right? If you have the concept and then you have the sign, this is what's known as an executive. And this is from Lacan. This symbolization isn't from, not Lacan, sorry, from Saussure. This symbolization isn't in Saussure. This is sort of my convention so that you can visually see it. I have the concept and then I have the sign. I have the concept in my head and then I have the sign. I'm not going to get into that yet. It's known as the executive activity. And I'll explain in this video the significance of that. If I have the sign and then I have the concept, you have the receptive, R-E, or if I could spell R-E-C-E-P-T-I-V-E, the receptive, and this is passive, right? So the executive function is an active function. You can think of it as executing, getting stuff done, actively engaged. And this is very, very, very sort of rudimentary. We'll complicate this far more. So insofar as I have a concept in my head, and I use that concept, and I use language as a medium to communicate that concept, I'm executing. Insofar as I am receiving, right? Insofar as I'm receiving an understanding of that concept, I now have that concept, then I am receptive, and it's sort of passive. This active-passive conception, it's a good foundation. It's a great foundation. I mean, what Saussure does is, I think, correct. This becomes problematized big time in Fourier, however. Fourier uses exactly this idea, Paulo Fourier uses exactly this idea to knock what he calls the banking concept. Because the banking concept is itself built on sort of this activity-passivity dichotomy. I, as an educator, have knowledge in my head because I went to school for so many years and read so many books. I sit down and I blah, 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 blah. My students listen to everything that I say, and as long as they say exactly what that I told them, then they pass my class and they get an A. Right? And he calls this the banking concept. I'm sort of filling your empty head with information. And I think rightfully so, Fourier rejects this idea. In fairness to Saussure, I don't want you to understand the executive and the receptive in that sense. Right? Now this might be up for debate, right? Depending on what side of the argument you want to choose. If you want to critique Saussure, you might disagree with me. If you want to defend Saussure, no, if you want to critique, yeah, it depends. It depends on your interpretation. The way that I understand my interpretation of Saussure's executive and receptive, it really doesn't have to do at this level with meaning, right? It doesn't have to do at this level with meaning, and I'll read a quote. Quote, "It is therefore possible to conceive of a science which studies the role of sign as a part of social life," right? What he's attempting to do, what Saussure is attempting to do, is he's recognizing sort of a very foundational claim, right? Or a foundational notion, which Lacan calls what I'm about to discuss his algorithm. He calls it Saussure's algorithm, right? Is how Lacan describes it. And basically what it is that I have a concept in my mind, and I want to communicate that concept to you. You don't yet have that concept in your mind. But insofar as I communicate that concept to you, I communicate that concept via sign, and then you have that concept. You have a concept in your mind, and you communicate that concept via sign, and now I have the concept. This is, in a sense, sort of it seems to be the theoretical framework for Fourier's notion of the banking concept, right? Which he uses as the system that he critiques pedagogy of the oppressed, right? Both within the educational system and as a social pedagogy of oppression. And Fourier is absolutely right. So the question is, if Fourier is right, and his critique of the banking concept is correct, then it seems to be the case that Saussure's executive activity and receptive passivity falls in line with that. The only way to salvage, if you will, Saussure's argument at this point, and I wasn't initially going to take it this deep, but you guys said you wanted it deep, the only way to salvage it is to show that that's not what Saussure's doing. And I'm arguing that that's not what he's doing. Why? What we're recognizing is that this is prima facie an ability within sentient human beings, right? If you're doing anthroposemiotics. There is a relationship between the ideas in my head and a desire to communicate that concept to you. And I use, as a member of the linguistic community, language to communicate that idea. I can verify, furthermore, that you now have an idea in your head. The idea isn't used to control yet. We haven't gotten to that level. It's just the communication of raw idea, raw concept, right? It's not for better or for worse. There's no valuation involved at this level. We're at a very, very sort of fundamental level, and I'm going to prove this. So, and I think I've done this in another video series sometime in the past. I am going to communicate a very, very specific idea to you right now. I'm not going to draw it on the board. After I communicate the idea, if you like, I'd like you to draw it on a sheet of paper. If you don't have a sheet of paper, go get a sheet, pause the video, go get a sheet of paper and a pencil and come back. Okay, if you're back, I'm going to communicate the idea. If you don't want to draw it, just think of this in your head. I want you to think of, right, I have a concept, and I'm going to allow you to have the same concept in your head that I have in my head, and I'm going to do that through language. Okay, through speech, technically. I want you to think of the image of a square that is inside of a circle. I want you to think of the image of a square that is inside a circle. I'll say it one more time. Think of an image of a square that is inside a circle. Well, if you have a square that is inside a circle, you drew something like that. Now, granted, your points might have touched the periphery of the circle and blah, 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 but that's roughly the image that you had. If you validate, yes, that is exactly the image that I had, or that approximated the image that I had. I didn't draw this, right? I didn't draw that. If this is the image you had, then what I've demonstrated, sort of in a Saussurean sense, was that I had an idea, I had a concept in my mind, and I was able to posit, I was able to deposit, I was able to posit that concept in your mind through speech. I was then able to validate that the concept that you had matched the concept that I had, because then you say, yes, that's what I had, you show me the picture that you draw, and we recognize, yes, we're talking the same language, I was able to communicate the concept, right? That's fundamentally what's being done. Now, if it's the case that the concepts that I have because I want to subordinate you, this becomes a lot more technical. This becomes a little bit more complicated, right? And this is why psychologists do what they do, right? Because it's not always as superficial as it seems, right? People have ulterior motives, and I might be attempting to communicate a concept to you that I want you to accept, knowing that insofar as you accept the concept, you subordinate yourself. That's at a deeper level of analysis. At this level of the analysis, all we're saying is that there is this, what he calls this, speech circuit. And this circuit is a transference of concepts from one individual to another, which cannot be denied, right? That cannot be denied. So the response to my hypothetical objector that I created that says, hey, Saussure is falling into the problem that was evoked by Paulo Freire, I would say, no, that's not correct, because Saussure's account is more fundamental than Freire's account. Freire's account is a step deeper, and we'll eventually get to that level, but at this level, we're just talking about the communication of concepts via signs. Right? All right.